Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio. You are about to join a frequency that will open your mind, expand your heart, and activate your spirit. Thank you for joining Kelly Meehan, Spirit Baby Medium and Master Energy Therapist. Kelly believes in the power of the Spirit Baby. She speaks with babies in spirit before life, in the womb, and after life. She supports, teaches, and guides others to tune into the intuitive and mystical parts of life for greater wisdom. Join her in meeting your soul baby and build your connection and relationship with deep love and trust. Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio with your host, Spirit Baby Medium, Kelly.
Hello. Welcome to episode 130, January 21st, 2022. Psychic spaces between soul-to-soul communication with baby beings. Are you open to your psychic space? How do you trust and access it daily? What healing practices can remind you to stay connected? What does Spirit Baby share with you? Such a beautiful winter, sunny day here in Southern California. And I love the conversation of psychic spaces, psychic awareness, psychic development, psychic you, psychic self, and how that psychic awareness and connection was such a dirty word, right? It can be such a dirty word. It's shameful, it's wrong, it's in certain religious doctrinations, it's evil, it's demonic, all these myths that come up around it. And psychic is just a word for understanding the deeper connections of who we are, I would say. And I really love, there's a few really well-known psychic mediums, of course, Edgar Cayce, and if you Google that, you get a million things. And, you know, I feel like back in the day, a lot of the medium psychics that came into creation, into creation, but into our reality, into our world, were actually mostly from, I want to say, European areas, and, you know, scattered all around the world. Or the ones that we know about are the ones that were talked about, because I'm sure there were so many different people in small cities, big cities, and villages, and other, definitely in indigenous areas as well. And so now we're in this space in 2022, and where our consciousness is, and what do we actually accept and feel and experience as a part of who we are. And that psychic part of all people, by the way, that's all there. You don't have to have some magical abilities or attain it. Some would even say it's a skill, but I don't even think it belongs in the skill set. I feel like it's just a part of who you are. It's like telling you about breathing. You know, psychic connection is you, and, you know, you can, it's like breathing and your organs pumping and your heart's pumping blood right now, but you're not super tuned into how it's doing it or why it's doing it. But there's something in the supernatural realms that we get very caught up in, having to have every scientific evidence and meaning and understanding of it. And of course, we can look into parapsychology, which I'm not sure if it's considered a new science anymore, but it has the umbrella of psychic, telekinesis, ESP, all the clairvoyance and all the clairs. I was going to say all the voyances. No, all the clairs. We're trying yet again to give texture and meaning to something that's a part of who we are, which is fine. I mean, I feel like that's what humans do. We try to give more meaning to the mystical. And as I always say, science and mysticism are separate things. They can like hang out together and give high fives, but they're really separate connections. They're separate entities. It's kind of like saying, well, I'm going to put fruit and vegetables and make them be together. Yeah, you can cook them together and eat them separate, but they're not the same thing. And we have to be very conscientious of that. What kind of boxes, right, are we squishing the psychic, supernatural, really the allness of who we are into spaces that they may not belong? And of course, I feel like especially with the era of internet, you can find a million different definitions of psychic expansion and awareness. And I always feel like it's amazing to go back in history. Like I said, Edgar Cayce, and there's a whole bunch of other people I'm completely not, naming. There's this great book I really have enjoyed kind of going in and out of it, because I feel like there's such a clarity. It's called Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development. And it's by Richard Ireland, and he's kind of like an Edgar Cayce. He's up there in bringing this connection in. And his son wrote this book, I believe. But I love about this book, I haven't fully sat and read it. I just kind of go through it. And I actually bring this book, ideology and methods, into my mentorship. And hopefully in the next few months, the Spirit Baby Academy will be open. And I want to really go deeper with these parts of ourselves and really see them and let them be transparent and bring them forward in a way with confidence, in a way, I've always said, with normalcy, right? Because maybe you're tuning in and you're a Spirit Baby communicator, or you just feel like you don't even know, but you're in maybe conception, pregnancy, or dealing with birth loss to conception. There's a lot of feelings, a lot of energy involved. And so, you finding your center, knowing who you are, and moving into that internal development is very empowering. And it can provide so much clarity and so much really ease. I would even say less anxiety. There's an epidemic, right, with depression and anxiety for so many reasons. I feel like if I can generalize it, one of the reasons I would say is people lost who they are. Like, who are we? We're from the stars, we're galactic, we're divine, we're from God. Like, there's so many different, we're allness, oneness, part of the universe. It's like that is the piece that people shut down. It's very collective, though. So be kind with yourself, compassionate and loving. It's very collective. And even the psychic, the definition of psychic awareness, abilities, it's very collective. And it's not your fault so much. I don't want you to be victimizing yourself, but also taking responsibility at the same time is very powerful. And so your psychic expansion, or I like to say your psychic spaces, are always with you. It's a part of you. And again, remember, the normalcy of it is really potent. And I remember, oh my gosh, how many years ago? So 10, 20, maybe 30 years ago, I discovered my psychic abilities 30 years ago. Let's see, 15, 25, 35, 45, 10, 20, 30, over 30 years ago. And actually, I feel like I remember the very moment. And maybe you can kind of sit in reflection. A lot of people feel their psychic awareness when they're children. I didn't as a child. I lived in survival stress, and my nervous system was like, we can't do this. And so mine was more in my teen years, which is very common when puberty hits. And so some children may have a psychic awareness and connection is natural, and then they feel like maybe it shuts down. I feel like what happens, and I've read this before, and I thought it was pretty amazing. I think I read it not too many years ago, and it made sense for my story, is that after puberty, something gets activated. And this connection is just there. It's like initiation into the cycles of the body and into consciousness. And I myself remember being outside in my backyard in the suburbs of, New Jersey, and it could have been a fall day. I don't remember. I feel like the trees were bare now that I see it. I remember just walking through these little small trees. Like, it wasn't like some big old tree property. This was when I was older. When I was younger, there's a lot of tree properties, but this was a different house. My parents were trying to move up to this bigger house, and it had this yard where it had a few of these small trees, and you could kind of walk into them. And I remember walking, and I turned and stopped, and I looked, and I was like, oh my gosh, the tree is talking to me. And I didn't think I was crazy at all, actually. And I wasn't an eccentric kid. I was a quiet kid. Everyone knew Kelly's the quiet kid, the quiet one, never caused any problems. I just kept things very internal, which, by the way, is not good. I paid for that later with not being well, and suppression, right? And so I remember this tree, and I was like, and I looked at the tree like, how do I know this? I know how this tree feels. I thought that was so fascinating, but it felt so visceral inside me, and this deep sense of knowing. And that was the early empath, physical empath, which I wasn't sure, what that was as of yet. I didn't have a lot of guidance and training in that. I just had to figure it out on my own, which is why I like to bring mentorship to others, because I see the potential and I understand it in such a deep level. And so then I started to discover, trees talk. Okay, sure, trees talk. I got to tell my best friend that. Okay, sure, trees talk. And then I started to notice I could tell how animals felt. And I was like, how do I know how animals feel? That's interesting. I'm like, okay. And I just knew. I just felt like they'd look at me, and it was probably more telepathy, and I didn't have a definition for that as of yet. okay, telepathy, that's great. And then objects, which is psychometry, the reading of objects, mirrors, tables, especially mirrors, old mirrors. I was like, what is that? I feel it physically in my body. So the physical empath comes up. I feel dizzy a lot. And with objects, and then years later, a woman's like, here, you can read objects here, and she started giving me things. I was freaking out. Like, what do you mean I could read objects? Apparently I could read objects. And so if something is so I could read objects means museums, thrift stores, antique shops aren't the best places for me to go to because they're so loud and uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And maybe you're like going, oh my gosh, that's totally me. That's your psychic awareness, tapping into every single energetic frequency around you that has different dimensional awarenesses and connections to reality. And so then fast forward later, fell in love with New Age, fell in love with this little New Age shop in Venice. I moved out of New Jersey to California, hanging out in the Psychic Eye, it was called at the time, and learning about ESP, learning about Carolyn Mace. Oh, Carolyn Mace is the best world-renowned medical intuitive. It'd be so cool. How does she do that? I want to do that. I'd love to be that, but I would never do that or be that. That's not me. Funny, right? Projecting years and years later, medical intuitive, spirit baby medium. I had no idea. But I guess you could say I had 30 years of training, really, with life experience. And I do feel like life experience is powerful. But, of course, I wouldn't say it was shut down. There was a suppression in between when I became very sick in my 20s, 30s, went back to school, opened it up again, was getting a lot of good responses and started testing and playing in the waters and energy of psychic space, sharing people the things that came up and getting major evidential validation. And then realizing, oh, my goodness, this was always with me. I remember daydreaming on buses and hanging out with people and always getting visual imagery, right? Because we only know our own reality. And maybe even just reflecting now, like where your connection is to who you are as a child, as an adult, like psychic awareness is ongoing. You came into this world with that function. It's embedded inside you. It's like, again, it's like the organs and the body of breath, the way the blood moves, it's a part of you. And this is going to be really powerful and good for you on your connection, within your connection, I should say, with spirit baby communication. And just sit with that and receive that. I feel like that's, again, it's very powerful. You are supernatural. It's not somebody else. Yes, there are different levels. Of course, there are different levels. I know, some of these psychic mediums that intimidate me, and I'm like, oh, I'm not that. That's not me. But it doesn't matter. I mean, we could be very similar. I have no idea. It really just depends on us. It depends on our energy and kind of what we're connecting with and what we bring forward. And we also know that, I even feel like the famous, quote-unquote, famous psychic / mediums, because psychic and medium is a little different. They could be together, I feel. It's all, TV stuff and things. Doesn't really make them the best. It's just they could have good promotional, marketing to get them really out there and be seen and heard in that way. And that's their vision and that's their purpose, right? And so just because they're world famous actually doesn't really make them the best. But that's my interpretation of it. And so, again, knowing where your psychic space is. And so I want to read something. I really like this, Your Psychic Potential, Richard Ireland. Just to go a little bit in history and why, if you're questioning where your psychic connection is in your communication process, this is a good statement. So it's in the preface here. Historically, Westerners have always been concerned with the visible than the invisible world. And by invisible, I am, of course, not referring to the colorless void of outer space, the transparent atmosphere of Earth, the microscopic realm of viruses and bacteria, the mysterious domain of atomic and subatomic particles, or the imperceptible zones of the electromagnetic spectrum. Rather, I'm alluding to the spiritual and psychical forces that have been known to Far Eastern initiates and Native American contemplatives for ages. And so, of course, there's more expansion into the Christianity and the Native American awareness. And I feel like this is a powerful statement because if you're somebody that feels very psychically inclined and very accepting of it, then you have broken through energetically to the world of consciousness that says you can't be that, or you have to follow some kind of spiritual format. And some people, it could take a lifetime. Some people will never understand that. And so my point is, collectively, we are steeped in so many different belief systems, and they become truth, even though they can be completely false and have no connection to anything. This is what's interesting. And I challenge you to go into those spaces. I mean, how could we not love to be challenged by that? I love to be challenged by that because my world is very supernatural. I see, know, hear things that others can have no idea about, or maybe it seems really out there to other people. Again, normalizing it. I'm always about normalizing it because this is the normal me. There's nothing out there about that. I'm just like a person like anybody else. I just have an awareness of my extrasensory perceptions that I continue to sharpen and get more in a love relationship with, because it saves me and it loves me and it knows me. And so I love that idea of really looking beyond the self in so many ways to go, and 2020 was really the push for a lot of people. I see a lot of, I want to say reckless, awakeners, I'll call them. Or maybe people could call them conspiracy people, or they're just off the walls because it's like a break in their consciousness and it's just pouring all out and they don't know how to harness it. And it comes off as reckless and all over the place and confusing and crazy. And I'm watching that. I'm observing that and going, okay, that's interesting. And people have to come into their own awakening at different times. And so kind of shifting into the psychic space, you're in communication with baby energy, and that's what it is. It's an energy. It's a potential energy with you, around you. It is a real soul. It is a real spirit. Say that again. It is a real soul. It is a real spirit. It's not an imagination. It's not a fantasy. And so your sensory system is going to be the part that lets you hear, connect, tune in, and understand. Be a spiritual detective, as I would say, and be able to trust what you receive, even if you have no idea at times. People that have worked with me know sometimes I say I have questions because I don't understand things all the time. And there's some things that are not what I connect with in private sessions. The information, the way I connect, they're not in books. There's no books. I have no book to open up and read, which is why my book hopefully will be coming out this year. We'll see. I say that every year, don't I? It's in the works. It's always working on that. And there's such different philosophies and connections with the realms of the before life. And we see it with a lot of different spirit baby intuitives, spirit baby mediums, and psychic mediums, and it's their frequency. It's what's being shared between different frequencies of different people. And I'll have this in another podcast, but there's some things that are shared that I think are inappropriate, that are actually hurtful and harmful. But we also have to set ourselves up to go, okay, you show up for certain experiences and connections, and you have to do what you want with those things. And so working from the sensory system, and what do I mean by sensory system? Smelling, touching, tasting, feeling, hearing, seeing. I feel like there's one, a step into, an awareness of connection with the physical bodies, which I feel like is important. Because in our own physical houses here, our temporary carbon-based houses, we have to use them. And in there's even other different perceptions beyond that. And I love this because in the book it really talks about it. And you can even Google this if you're curious about it, or DuckDuckGo it, is synesthesia and I'm not going to say it right, hyperesthesia, which has to do with seeing color, but more of you can hear color, or you could see sound. Isn't that really neat? A lot of people who do hallucinogens will have that kind of experience, but you can actually have it without without hallucinogens or plant-based medicines or rituals. I know that's a really big push right now, is plant-based medicine, right? And hyperesthesia, I'm probably not saying it properly. A person who possesses a particularly acute sensory ability. Okay, there we go. Like having really good auditory abilities, like sound, hearing, or eagle eyes. So it's just a heightened sensory perception. and an ability. And so kind of shifting back into plant medicine, and people really love plant medicine, and they pull it, into the psychic realms or other type of toad medicine and different things. And if you feel called to do it, then do it. I think it really can be helpful for people with anxiety or depressive disorders, but you have to also be open that when you're cracking open into different levels of consciousness, you're going into quantum electromagnetic field connections. You're changing your emotional and spiritual chemistry, which can be positive for a lot of people, but actually can also be quite negative. Nobody talks about that part. Everyone talks about the positivity and how it's life-changing and it's a spiritual journey, but anything can bring us into a spiritual journey. I feel like you actually don't need to have substances and hallucinogens to be in a spiritual journey, but that's a whole other level of opening to that connection and awareness, and many people do. And so, to what you feel instinctual about and connect with. And so I love yet again in this book, they talk about 4 levels of psychic activity. This is kind of fun. Like, what does that mean, psychic activity? And, what does it mean to be psychic? Like, that's what I should say. And so under the psychic umbrella, there's 4 major areas, as they would call it. And I really like it. I really resonate with this. It's because it's very basic. It's not like you have to be, you got to get your crystal ball and your magic rug going, and then therefore you have powers. No. Emotional is the first one. Intuitive, spirit, and a oneness. And of course you can read deeper into, and it's a continuum. It's not like, it's just kind of these dry lines or these harsh lines in between these connections. They're all kind of mold into each other, right? So if you're emotional, there you go, you're a psychic being. If you're intuitive, you're a psychic being. If you connect with spirit, you're a psychic being. If you have a oneness that maybe is not even connected to all those, or maybe they're all together, you are a psychic being. So right now in this moment, I want you to go, oh, look, I am psychic, and I've accepted that. And so in those 4 levels, I don't think the levels are like you have to get to one or another, but I'm sure you have to move through whatever your own frequency is. And even though, this book even says psychic development, I don't believe that we have to develop in the sense of like we have to get to some psychic space. To me, it's about remembering. It's really about remembering what is already there. It's like moving out of one direction into another, going, oh, look. It's not like, I don't know, it's almost hard to explain, but I can really feel the energy of it. There's a current of energy that runs with everything that we want, need, and the wholeness and pureness of health, of conception, of creativity is right there. And so really it's a matter of our own energies and connections to drop away, soften, and then let that current run through us. Instead, it feels like collectively we're pushing into the emotional stuff, the ego stuff, the slave self, the mental energies, the intellect. We're projecting that outward, trying to get into the stream, trying to catch into that stream. But it's really, that's not what's happening. We're having to kind of shift back and then settle into, I want to say receiving. But of course, it's more than just that. There's different pieces to it. It is a receiving, maybe an allowance, an understanding, and then an owning. Again, a remembrance. I feel like the 2022 is a time of remembrance, spiritual remembrance. Who are you? Who will you become? What is next? And how can you be not so fearful of death? We'll just throw that one in there, Kelly. Another conversation to have. The internalness of who we are goes beyond so many different levels of our current awareness, let's say. And so when we hear psychic connections, many people will think about the clairs, right? Clairvoyance, which is clear seeing, clairsentience, which is clear feeling, or the empath, clairaudience, which is clear hearing, auditory, claircognizance, which is clear knowing, which is that, I just know it, clairsent, which is clear smell, having the ability to smell, clairaugustance, clear tasting, clair tendency. I mean, I'm not saying that right. That's clear touching. I just think that clear touching and that, maybe that's when I call myself the physical empath. It probably falls within that as well, or even the ability to read objects with your hands. And so you may fall into one of many of those areas. You actually may fall into all those areas. I've actually fallen into, let's see, all those areas at one time or another. I've had taste. I've had smell a few times recently. I've had auditory, currently on in that knowing space. But my most major is the clairvoyance, clairsentience, is the one I always tend to go to and play around with that. It's fun. It's fun. You can kind of see where your skills are at, your fun, playful, natural psychic connection. And so I feel like I'm giving everybody a Psychic 101, Beyond 101 class here on some level to get you tuned in, because, that's life. And how you apply that connection to just your own intuitive psychic self really does play into your connection on your conception journey. So let's say you're struggling with conception and things are really intense, and there's a struggle between what you're doing. Is it natural? Is it IUI? Is it IVF? Is it embryo adoption? Is it sperm donation? These things, these choices require a certain amount of conscious energy of intuition. And if you feel like you can't get there, then you have to sit with that and see. And sometimes you do have to just jump in and see what happens. And sometimes you do have to make things out of fear, right? We have different choices and options. And then in between that, you listen to spirit baby being. And it's hard to not put the adultness or the overly egotistical mind upon children. I hear it all the time with different people. It's hard not to, because we're trying to define something in our language in a way that is understandable. And sometimes there's no words. And, tune into that. Sometimes there's not a lot of words for your connection with baby being. And you may be in communication at times and not realize it, or you may be in communication at times and fully realize it. Wherever you are, you are. And you can definitely extend and develop that, right? We can use the word development in there. And this is why I do programs. This is why I'm currently in co-creation, a journey with Spirit Baby, using nature and Spirit Baby principles to get people into that next level, to be in love with themselves, to see the creative force around them, right? It's powerful. It's right there. It's right there. It's incredible how I can witness this. I think years ago I didn't see it this way, but this is why I know we're in major conscious shifts. And, it's not going to be without intensity, of course, and fear and darkness and all that gunky stuff. But the ability to be that light and that sense of love is so much more powerful, let's say, than the fear and the gunk. And, it's really up to your own reality and what you want to bring forward, because you collectively with others continue to bring that new world if you're in that vibrational space. And only you know that and witness it and connect with it, and you will see others in that space as well. It's not a lonely space. And so maybe you're in pregnancy and you question your connection, or there's fear, or how are you allowed to birth in the way you want to? That's such a big thing, I feel like, in pregnancy. And is baby going to be okay? Having spirit communication, instinctual communication before the womb, before baby's born, is powerful. Oh my gosh, beyond belief. You have a spiritual relationship with this being. You have such deep trust. And you don't have to have every answer as I say that. You have that connection. And in that connection, you get to then birth your baby and unfold in that birth space. Birth is not dangerous. Birth is instinctual. What happens culturally in the maternity system, and we see it around the world, except in indigenous cultures, there's a lot of micromanaging something that's beautiful and natural. And I want to challenge you that if you're tuning in and you're in pregnancy. And yes, sometimes you do need intervention. You do need cesarean birth, but it's way too out of control, right? It really is. We don't really need it that much. And an induction, it's the fancy thing right now is to induce your baby, which it can be dangerous. Baby's going to come when they're ready. Under very extreme circumstances like cesarean birth and inductions, they shouldn't be on the top of the list. Should be at the bottom of the list. And only really good, heart-centered, unfearful doctors know that, and midwives. Everyone else that's feared and bought into the system of beliefs around what medicine and the obstetrician organizations look like. And I know they're changing, and I love that they're changing, and I'm going to keep optimism on it, but I'm also going to keep speaking about the advocacy of what women are in tune with. And I got to experience two different parts of that, where I went from home birth to hospital and the way they treated me. And it's a great story. It's a very traumatizing story, but it was a very deep, intuitive story, which ended up to be very positive in my favor. But I had to jump through a lot of dark holes to get there to fight for who I am and who I was and what I knew. But then the second birth was like, it's like night and day. It was just beautiful at home birth, doing my own thing, being instinctual, connecting with the environment that I wanted and created. And it was just, it's a journey, it's a story. And we do have these experiences and we build them together and bring them out to our communities. And I don't want that to happen to anyone else. And then even after, in pregnancy, after you have your baby, then you have the instinctual connection of newborn telepathy, I would say. And that's another thing I hopefully will be teaching this year is the after. What do you do when you have baby? And what's that telepathic spiritual connection? As I have a lot of experience even in the psychology of attachment parenting, bringing those worlds together, because it's so instinctual and it's hard sometimes postpartum, and there's a lot of, rebirthing happening on so many levels, and your baby's in your arms and what do I do with this thing? How do I emotionally, spiritually show up the best that I can? And let's say you're in the psychic spirit baby communication space and you're dealing with multiple losses or maybe just major loss in your reality, and maybe you're moving into conception, maybe you're not. That psychic mediumistic space is going to be super powerful, and this is where I have the Afterlife of Spirit Baby group and Facebook, and I do multiple things that are very loss specific for that community, a very small, tight-knit community. I feel like that goes, you know what? My child of light is speaking to me, and what do I do with this? And can I believe it? Can I trust it? Absolutely. And bringing that psychic space in, and that your child in that space has messages for you. If your life isn't supposed to be complete, abyss of darkness without them. And of course, I'm not going to take away that it will feel the grief and the pain of that, but you also get to feel the exuberance and light that this being and their own purpose is intertwined with your heart, and you get to witness and experience that on many different levels. So wherever you are in your psychic baby space, continue to be with it, receive it, align with it, develop it. I'm going to use the word develop. I know I said, develop it, but really remembering that you are a psychic being. You hold potentiality for so much energy in psychic space. And your spirit baby being, whether you're in conception, pregnancy, or healing loss, they are in communication with you. I know that. I've seen that with hundreds and hundreds of people. And it's okay if it's new to you. It's okay if you feel highly experienced, wherever it is. Continue to receive inward, into your mind, into your heart, into your body. And so I want to thank you for joining. Let you sit with all that. Let that all settle in. Thank you for joining episode 130, January 21st, 2022, Psychic Space Between Soul to Soul Communication with Baby Being. And, of course, I'm going to say, if you like my podcast, please subscribe, leave reviews, and you can check out every other week is the podcast. And I have a book, a journal. It's Sacred Communication, a Spirit Baby journal. And currently I don't have available a Spirit Baby Oracle cards, answers from Spirit Baby, which you will hear about it soon if you sign up for my newsletter. Thank you so much for joining this episode.
This is Spirit Baby Radio. Thank you for joining Kelly in the energy of awareness, love, healing, and soul communication. Please join the next episode at www.soulbabycommunication.com.